Crystal will tell you now. In fact, she gave me permission to tell you that during that time she had terrible insecurity, extreme insecurity. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that she was overweight. I don't mean 20 pounds overweight. I mean, she was big. And she started getting picked on at school. And for the first year or so, that picking was unlike anything she'd ever experienced before. It wounded her deeply. And then she started toughening up. And she discovered what a lot of people discover when they get picked on a lot. The best way to keep others from picking on you is to pick on them. She and her big friends did that viciously. But it was all coming not out of strength, but out of a hidden weakness. Point that out for a couple of reasons. One is a very general statement. Anytime somebody is behaving badly, they're hurtful to you, to people you love, or maybe it is the person you love being hateful to you, that's not coming out of strength. That's not coming out of security and a joyful relationship with Christ. It's coming out of misery. It's coming out of fear. It's coming out of deep, deep insecurity. And it was only as my sister grew up that she was able to look back and see that. And what she says now is that she now wouldn't take anything for having gone through those big years and going through the phase of being very down on herself, wounded, and then becoming that mean person that everybody else was scared of. She said, I learned so much about myself. I learned so much about other people. And it helps me to this day. I wouldn't trade anything for it. But there's more good news to that story. When she was 13, my sister Crystal went on a diet. And boy, did it ever work. It just melted off when she started exercising, eating better. And by the time she was in 9th grade, she was a cheerleader. She was a basketball star. She was homecoming maid. She was class favorite and class president. And now she's a Zumba teacher. And she's about the healthiest 36-year-old you're going to meet. Her image of herself changed. And she went from hating herself to loving herself. Strange discovery popped up. Now that I love myself, instead of hating myself, I find that I love other people instead of hating those other people. She grew up. Growing up is a hard thing to do. My sister Crystal did it successfully. Not everybody does. Truth is, a whole lot of us are stuck way back there in 7th grade. See ourselves the same way we did then, or at the very least, how we think, how we operate now is strongly influenced by bad, painful, sick stuff that happened way back in adolescence. And Abraham Maslow, the psychologist, says the majority of people never outgrow adolescence. The majority of people never outgrow adolescence. Now, physically, we outgrow lots of things. If you're over 21, you're probably about as tall as you're ever going to get. A lot of us have already started shrinking a bit. You're never going to be a fat little 5-year-old again. But what about spiritually? What about emotionally? What about your ability to relate confidently with other people in healthy ways. I'm going to tell you the truth. It's a sad truth. Most people have not completely outgrown adolescence. We operate in some of the same ways we did in ninth grade. We think and we measure other people and we evaluate ourselves by some of the same criteria that we used back in ninth or 10th grade. Most never grow adolescence. And that's one of the reasons that it is so easy to get hurt bad, even in church. Any kind of relationships you're involved in with other people, whether it be at work, in the family, at church, you will eventually get hurt. And most of the time, the person who hurts you, no matter how big and smart they look on the outside, they haven't outgrown adolescence. They hurt you because there's something beneath the surface that they're after, which you don't see. And you are somehow a threat in a way you would never have dreamed. But in their mind, you're a threat. And most people, as you've heard me say, are mean when they're threatened. Even people who are normally nice. I remember the very first adult confrontation I had with another adult. It was pretty soon after I started preaching. And it was in a church, I'm telling you, you can get your butt whipped bad in church. And I did, because there was this man, he was in his early 60s. He'd retired. He'd been extremely successful. He was very wealthy. He lived on a lake. And he got it in his head. I don't know why he thought it, but he just thought that 24-year-old preacher just didn't know everything. And he didn't realize that I actually did. And so he didn't go along with all the things I wanted to do, with what I wanted to start, with what I wanted to expand, with what I wanted to shrink. He was not going to let me be the leader. He was going to be the leader. And I came to understand something about that man. He and I, both of us, were having trouble. We were having conflict because we both needed to outgrow adolescence. Neither one of us had outgrown adolescence. Both of us were still operating as if this is high school. And we got to show up the other. And in junior high, high school, it's all about showing out so people will like you. By the way, that is a lie. You show out, and even if people are impressed, they're not going to like you. They're going to be jealous of you and therefore not like you. It's the truth. People don't want you to impress them. No. I know it's news, but it's true. People do not want you to impress them. You know what they really want? They want to feel that you are impressed by them. So your showing out is only going to backfire if you're doing it to make people think you're cool and like you. Show out, show up other people. Everything's a competition. Everything's a comparison. Comparing what I've done to what you've done, what I've achieved, what you've achieved, what I have, what you have. He and I were both there. And it created a big problem. And because he and I had not outgrown adolescence, what level of maturity do you think we handled that problem on? We handled it on a very immature level. You see, I took an approach with him that worked wondrously in junior high. Because you know what I learned in junior high? I hope many of you have learned it. If you're in junior high, you need to learn it. And it's this. When somebody's bullying you, they're not going to just stop out of the goodness of their heart. And telling teachers usually only makes it worse. And what I discovered personally, now this was 35 years ago, 800 miles from here, but what I discovered, only one thing was going to change it. And that was to bust their head just as hard as you could when they weren't expecting it. It was not that I was a tough guy. No. But I was a smart boy. And I'd seen enough fights to notice, hey, whoever gets the first good lick usually wins. Y'all ever notice that? All of you fight fans? Whoever gets the first good lick usually wins because the other's so stunned that they're dazed for a couple of minutes. And I put that into practice. And the last thing those bullies were expected from a four-eyed fatty like me was for them to get up in my face and me turn around like I was going to walk up and then pound them in the nose. And it worked for me over and over and over. Well, eventually one day it didn't work, but most of the time it worked. Most of the time it worked. So I'm still thinking like an adolescent. I'm still dealing with a 60-year-old adolescent bully. And so I knew what to do. Yeah, I've done it before. It's most of the time worked. I'm going to go over to his house. I'm going to surprise him. He's not going to see this coming. I'm going to jump all over him. I'm going to tell him I don't even think he is saved. I don't even believe he's a Christian. And he's sure got no business being a leader in this church. And then went off on his wife too. And I did it. And he sat there. He listened. And then my life became hell for about the next 2 months. Because what was bad turned into awful. I made things far worse. And I was baffled. How did that make things worse? I did not get it. How did that make things worse? It used to work so well. The answer is, I'm not down in junior high anymore. This is adulthood. And listen, things that work well for you in one stage of your life will destroy you if you use those same things in the next. Many of you, I would guess all of you to some degree, are like me in that there was a time when, well, first of all, for example, you were a kid. You didn't have a lot of power, didn't have a lot of authority. You didn't have what you have now. And you developed certain ways of coping with problems. And it wasn't a real healthy way. It wasn't a mature way. So like me surprising the bully with a punch. It wasn't smart. It wasn't wise, but it did work. And so you concluded, I'll just keep doing this the rest of my life. Listen, what worked for you on a lower level will not work for you as you grow up. As you grow, you've got to continue growing mentally, emotionally, spiritually, growing in your understanding of yourself, of other people, of God, and how all of that works together. Most of us don't outgrow adolescence, but we can. And that's exactly what the Bible tells us to do in many different places, in many different ways. But here's one I want to draw your attention to. 1 Peter chapter 2. 1 Peter chapter 2, and I'm going to read verses 1, 2, and 3. So, get rid of all evil behavior. Be done with all deceit, hypocrisy, jealousy, and all unkind speech. Like newborn babes, you must crave the pure spiritual milk, so you'll grow into a full experience of salvation. Just pay attention to that word, that phrase there. Full salvation. A full experience of salvation. Listen, just as there is a full experience of salvation, there's also a partial experience of salvation. And I don't mean that you're half saved and you're half lost, but I do mean that when it comes to our way of thinking, operating, and dealing with people, a lot of us, me included, are partly converted and partly not. I've been transformed in some ways, but there are other ways I'm still the same old dude that I was long ago. And that's what this is talking about. Move into a full experience of salvation, which means really to just keep on growing, keep pressing on. And I want you to pay attention. I'm just going to stick with that first verse. Go back to that first verse. Get rid of all evil behavior. When you hear evil behavior, your mind wonders, what kind of evil behavior is he talking about? He says 4 things that most of us would not automatically call out as terrible sins, but he calls it evil behavior. Apparently, so far as Peter is concerned, evil behavior is deceit, hypocrisy, jealousy, and all unkind, parenthesis, sarcastic, critical speech. That's the specific kind of evil behavior that he was saying, get rid of. It's a mark of adolescence. It's a mark of spiritual immaturity. It's a mark that you do not have a full experience of salvation. Now, go back to what we were saying earlier. Most people who operate that way do so because they're insecure. Insecure people tend to be deceitful, jealous, hypocritical, and sarcastic. Pretty well established that, but just think about it for a minute. If you're really insecure, then you will sometimes lie and falsely misrepresent yourself for reasons other people can't even understand. Why would he want to lie about that? I'll tell you why he wanted to lie about that, because it's not that he's trying to rip you off financially, it's that he's trying to make you think he's something better than what he really is. He's trying to impress you, and he's deceiving you in order to do that because he wants it so bad for you to be impressed. That's where deceit comes from. Hypocrisy comes when we try to be something that we're not. And we want so bad to be on a certain level when we're not really there. And so we try to give the impression that we're more mature than we really are. And when we do that, it's just a matter of time before our behavior and our speech reveals we're not up there. We're still down here. Jealousy. Jealousy is all about adolescent behavior, critical speech. Enough on that. But I want you to go back to this illustration about the man in the church with whom I clashed. Remember I said we were both on the same adolescent level. That's why it became such a mess. I want to show you a quote that helps me understand way better how all this stuff works. It's a quote by Einstein. Kendall, can we see the first? I'm going to show you two variations. Albert Einstein said, we cannot solve our problems with the same level of thinking that created them. Now let's leave that there a minute. And let's apply that to my story here. Why did this man and I have this problem in the first place? It's because we were competing with one another. It's because both of us wanted to be the big dog in a little church. And neither of us could stand to be wrong. Both of us were very threatened by the other. We were on a low level of maturity. And what we were trying to do is solve our problems on that same level of thinking that created the problem in the first place. And it doesn't work. Now here's a variation on the quote You'll hear this in many different forms. Let's see that next. No problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. We create certain problems by being immature, by being spiritual adolescents, emotional adolescents. You will create problems in your marriage that are totally unnecessary because you'll be offended and threatened by things that should not threaten you. If you're emotionally immature and spiritually immature, you can't have a good marriage because there's all these different things that the two of you can't talk about. Because you got this image you got to maintain, and you don't want to acknowledge any kind of weakness. You don't want to acknowledge that you need any kind of help or that there's even a problem. And if anybody suggests it, especially your spouse, you're fighting mad. That's the level that creates the problem. You want to solve that problem, you're going to have to move to a higher level, and you're going to have to operate in a much more mature way. You got to learn to be open and honest with other people, even when it means opening up and sharing things that would have once threatened you horribly. But you've grown. Now live like it. Act like it. Listen. I've got so many flaws in our marriage. My marriage with Mena is so imperfect. And yet, wait. I caused so many problems in our marriage. There we go. I caused so many problems in my marriage. And we've never had major issues that put us on the brink of divorce. But for the first few years, I had bitterness that I didn't know how to deal with, and it came out on her. I had hurts from the past that had not been healed, and I didn't know what to do with them. And I had these unrealistic expectations that I expected her to meet. Thank God she was so sweet and so kind. She didn't pour gas on it when I would strike the match. She waited till my match burned out. That's spiritual maturity. But I wanted her to think I was big and strong and I could handle it. Nothing threatened me. Bull snot. She now knows everything about me. She knows that my testosterone is the lowest Dr. Fink has ever seen right now. And so she knows to give me those shots that I've been taking for 2 months. And she's seen a difference. And she sees the energy I've got. And she sees how much happier I am and better I feel. Because, see, I was just dragging. I would go home on Sunday afternoon and just almost collapse into bed, sleep for 4 hours, get her to wake me up before dark. Energy was just a major problem. I didn't know what was causing it. I got checked. That was low. He said, that'll sure cause it. That'll cause it right there. So I started taking it. I just want to go jump on a trampoline or something now. But I have to be able to be honest with my wife. You get to where you can be honest with your wife, then you can be honest with other people. Before long, you can be honest with a whole room of people, many of whom you don't even know, and who are going to decide whether or not to come back based on what you said. But I'm not going to solve those problems at the level of thinking that created them. I got all that big manly image stuff, picked that up back when I was so insecure. I was trying hard to prove myself. Worked out, strained my back, curved my back, benching in such a stupid way that now I got these problems, all trying to be big, all trying to be bad. Come on now. Listen. We put a heavy load on ourselves and other people when we refuse to grow up. We make life harder than it has to be. We make life more miserable and more controversial and more full of conflict than it has to be. And you know what the answer for most of your problems are? In your marriage, in your work, in your home, and in your church. You know how you're going to, the only way to overcome those? Outgrow them. You've heard me say it before, and you're going to hear it again. There are many problems that you cannot solve because you'll just try to solve them down on that level that created them. You got to outgrow them. And that's what the spiritual life, that's a huge part of what the spiritual life is. Outgrowing. And as you grow, the bigger you grow, the more secure you become, the more faith you got in God, the more confidence you have in yourself, and all that junk you used to have to do, and all those fronts where you had to defend yourself suddenly don't matter. You outgrew that. And you can be yourself, and you can be real, and people like that. And it works. It works. It creates good relationships with others and with God. I was thinking as I was preparing this sermon, I was realizing, Lance, there are some people that never were fat and didn't have 4 eyes. And they didn't get picked on, and they're not going to relate to what you were talking about. I guess it's true. Thank God if you didn't have to go through that. I hope you didn't. But there are people all around you who did. There's so many of them that you can't get away from them. And if nothing else, you can begin to understand them based on what we've talked about today. And do you know that understanding someone is the first big step toward being able to reconcile with them? Because you begin to understand this crazy way she acts. This way he souls up and won't talk to me. There are reasons for that. And you won't fix them by getting sarcastic. You'll only drive them further in. You will help a lot of that by being understanding, compassionate, merciful, which an old friend taught us to be. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy.